Check out those Army trucks here in Poland. Check those out. I'm wondering where they're going. So I woke up today thinking that I heard some sirens and I heard some sounds, but it was actually a dream that I had because right now I am no longer in Ukraine. I'm actually in Poland and I'm about 100 kilometers from the Ukrainian border and also the Belarusian border. It's actually fairly similar, and it's a really eerie experience to realize that here in Poland things are kind of normal. You know, you have restaurants, people go out, but I think that the war and what's happening is all they're pretty much talking about from my limited understanding of the language because I see people just scanning their Telegram channels, Telegram feeds, and even though things are kind of things are happening normal more or less, people are definitely um, feeling something, right? There's as though there's something going on beneath the surface. And I also today saw some army transport trucks like going from one place to another. So I don't know what's that related with. Maybe that's just a regular thing. Maybe it's part of something else. Maybe it's something having to do with the whole situation. But it's an eerie experience that we're so close, yet kind of so far to what's happening. Of course, Marina has her whole family in Ukraine in the city of Kharkov, and that city is getting hit very, very hard. So we're like in constant touch with them. Thankfully, they are not in the city itself right now. They were able to move to a small village that's near Kharkov, and so they're all together in a big house, going to stores, going to pharmacies to buy stuff, standing in lines and switching. Somebody waits, then this person goes home, and then somebody else goes. And Kharkov has been getting a very, very immense, the brunt force of the whole operation. Really, at least today, lots of it's getting lots of missiles being hit at it. Lots of things are happening, and it's one of my favorite cities in Ukraine. It's so hard to believe that something like this is happening. In fact, this whole thing, it's as strange as it sounds. It feels like a bad dream, like some kind of an eerie experience, because it's hard to believe that it's like a country where you live, a country where for a long time, places from childhood, etc., are getting bombed by the so-called brotherly nation, right? It's insane that something like this could happen in 21st century when people have a ways of agreeing with each other and figuring things out. And it feels like, this stuff only happens in Hollywood movies, you know, but it's crazy. At least in the initial stages, they were mostly hitting like military targets, airfields. So the casualties were very, very minimal. But now it seems that things are being escalated day by day. And, the most frightening thing is that the cities that we know right now, we might not recognize them when this whole thing is over, one way or another, because it's going to end. The problem is we don't know how it's going to end. And it's crazy, people that are connected to the country, were born in the country one way or another. They're reading the news constantly, trying to figure out how they can help, what they can do. And even me leaving, I still don't know if it's like 100% the right decision. It was the right decision in the moment, for sure, because I knew that if I don't leave right now with Marina, with everybody, that we might not leave at all. So maybe, like looking in the retrospect, maybe it was a better decision for her to leave and me going, staying in Kiev or going somewhere else. These kinds of things are very hard to kind of figure out. It's very hard to decide. But I can tell you that a lot of people did leave Kiev. Her co-workers, a lot of them left Kiev. They went to very remote areas in the country. We were on the train Kiev to Lviv. There were a lot of people, moving from Kiev to Lviv. There's a lot of movements, a lot of shuffling. And so I think that, people that are staying in Kiev, they have their reasons, and those reasons are respected. They should be respected. People that move to a different part of Ukraine, their decisions should be respected, because we can never judge a person's actions without being themselves, right? We can never do that. And so, you have to respect everybody's decision. But my personal decision, it's my own decision. I take responsibility for it, but I'm not 100% certain it's the right decision in retrospect. One thing that I can't help and to think about was the whole border crossing, right? Because getting out from Kiev to Lviv was fairly, it was easier or kind of simpler than I thought, because the previous day there were a lot of people in the whole Vokzal, which is the central railway station. But the next day it was very difficult to get out. There were no taxis. No, you couldn't, like, catch a you couldn't really catch a car to get there. It was very, very difficult. So we were actually living in an area that wasn't very far from Vokzal, but people that lived in other parts of Kiev, they couldn't get there, and so it was relatively, a smaller amount of people the next day. But getting to Lviv and leaving from Lviv, that was an experience all in itself, because Lviv was like this final point where a lot of people were trying to figure out where to go next, and we were just dumbfounded. It was just like this position of hopelessness when we arrived there, and we had no idea which way to go or what's the next step. And we got so lucky by this guy approaching us out of the blue, coming up to us, this young guy, and saying, "Hey, you guys looking for a ride?" And being a New Yorker, I don't trust many people that I don't know. And I was like, I had my, this kind of, I was on my guard, right? I had my guard up. And I was like, all right, well, where are you going? Which border crossing? Who you going with? I tried to kind of feel the guy out. And I was like, and Marina was ready to go, right? She was, she was like, okay, this is a good situation. Let's try. So I was like, all right, let's see what happens, because if we don't get a ride from this guy, it's gonna be a lot worse, right? It's gonna be a lot worse. We might not have a place to stay in Lviv, because unlike Kiev, where we have an apartment, in Lviv we don't have anything, and people are coming. And so once we talked, and we realized that this guy could be legit. He took us to a northern border crossing that nobody really goes to unless they know the area or they're local to that area, because in Lviv there's like a couple of border crossing into Poland, and there are also, known border crossing that people take to countries like Hungary, countries like Slovakia, and then you have Romania and Moldova, but those are kind of far from Lviv. And so this guy, he knew where to go. He knew how to get there. It was like a 2 hour drive, 1 hour and 45 minute drive. And we only had to stay in line for like an hour. And now we're hearing reports. I got an email from the US Embassy, because I registered with them, and they said that do not try Poland. People are, it's taking 30 hours for them to leave, at least, even more in cases. And we stood for an hour. And I can tell you, if you've never crossed the border with a lot of people, with a big, on foot, with a big line, and it's cold, it's fairly cold. It's not too cold, right? It was around like 3 degrees Celsius, so like 35, 36 degrees Fahrenheit. And you have all these families and kids and everybody trying to cross. It's a tough experience. Thankfully, it only took 1 hour on the Ukrainian side, and then an hour on the Polish side. But if we would have taken 30 hours, I was ready to, for me, I would deal with it. But Marina, right, I have to take into account her situations, her feelings. She wasn't feeling very good that day. She was, she wasn't in her best physical state. So it would have been just a complete nightmare for me. And myself, I wasn't really looking forward to doing that as well. So that was a great experience. And the other really good thing, if I can say, that came out of it, another really good thing is how the Polish people were accepting refugees. So instead of just, being very being very non-accepting, they were extremely accepting. They were very friendly. They had transfers from the border crossing, the whole point where you finish everything and you're about to leave. They would take you to another point inside the country. So this was like a 10-minute ride, maybe a 15-minute ride, or maybe even like a 20-minute ride somewhere. And this is the craziest part of the whole experience. Once we were driven to this point, I didn't even have time to get out. I don't even know what this point was. All I remember, there was a building, and in this building they had they had a bathroom there, probably they had maybe some food. It's like maybe a welcome center or something. But as soon as we get out, Marina starts talking to this young couple, like a man and a woman. This young couple, the woman was speaking Russian, and the guy was a local. He was Polish. And apparently, they immediately asked us if we need any help being driven somewhere. They immediately asked us, and I have no idea what's going on right now. I'm kind of lost because I go on the back of this truck, of this minivan that brought us there, and I'm taking out the suitcase. And she's apparently, like, this was agreed at the spot that they were going to help us. They were going to drive us to wherever we needed to be driven. They were there as volunteers helping people like us. And I was a little shocked, but what made it less shocking is that Marina had read about this whole situation from various Telegram groups. And so she told me that this is what's happening on the border. So I wasn't sure if this was actually on the border or this was later on. So I kind of was a little prepared, but still was kind of shocked. So apparently they were there, this young couple. We got into their car. They gave us like food. They gave us like, cookies, like bananas, different food. And then they drove us to the hotel. So I booked the hotel as we're driving. So while we're driving, I found a hotel and I'm like, let's go to this hotel. So as we're driving, it was like a 2 hour drive actually, to Lublin, the city. And I booked the hotel while we're on the way. And so they drive us there and they're so friendly. They're like, listen, this is the situation. How's the situation in Ukraine? What's going on? What do you guys have to deal with? And we're kind of explaining them. But at the same time, we're super tired after the crossing and we're kind of telling them, um, listen, like this is kind of what happened and we're kind of in a daze. But they're so friendly, so open. They're like, after they drive us to the hotel, this is our number. This is like, if you need any help, you can call us, that kind of thing. So it was just an amazing experience. Like really warm-hearted individuals, very, very, really, really friendly, really open. Something we did not expect. It was just insane. Just an insane, out of this world kind of experience. Now, when we were making the trek from Kiev all the way to Lviv to Poland, we met a lot of people on the way in the journey, and this was people from all different walks of life, people from families with no families, people that had certain views about the whole situation, different views, etc., etc. It was anywhere from young Ukrainian guys just trying to go to a different part of Ukraine. I met an American guy who had like a lot of army experience. He was from Texas, spent like 10 years in the army, and he said he was actually fighting with another, I don't know if it was like a Ukrainian group or another foreign group. And then they got into some heavy fighting just in the suburb of Kiev. And he got separated from his group. He got separated from his team. And then he found out they were in Western Ukraine, and so he was on his way to Western Ukraine to be reconnected with these guys. And he didn't know what his next plan of action was: stay in Lviv, leave Ukraine, or go somewhere else. He wasn't really sure what his next plan of action is. And then in Poland, well, in Ukraine, on the border crossing to Poland, we met families that were just leaving with nothing but pretty much, their the shirts on their back, the jackets on their back, and their the bags they had. So it was just like they were leaving without looking back. They, like that's it. They were just leaving, and a lot of them, the battles that were happening, like we met people in the Kiev region, and Kiev experienced a lot of fighting. They were like, we have nothing to come back to, and so this is just complete like craziness, complete sadness that there's a whole humanitarian, basically humanitarian disaster that's developing, because according to some of the figures I read, around 500,000 people left Ukraine through various points, and most of them went to Poland, but they also went to other countries. 500,000 people as of the filming of this video. Maybe it's even more now. So it's insane, like just to experience people leaving with nothing and not knowing if they're gonna come back. And even ourselves, like we have no idea what the situation is. We don't know Um, what's gonna happen? We don't know if if tomorrow it's still gonna be Ukraine. It's gonna be another country. They had some talks as of the filming of this video, but we don't know what those talks resulted in, and it's actually getting more and more serious hour by hour, day by day, in terms of fighting, in terms of the economic, the isolation of Russia. It's getting very, very, very serious. And who knows, right? I'm filming this video now, but tomorrow morning it could be completely new day with brand new developments. And who knows, what the future awaits. Because one thing I realized in the beginning is that in the beginning it was serious, but it wasn't that serious because they just entered Ukraine. They weren't near Kiev. There was some fighting here and there. But the next day it got like 10 times more serious. Now it was like, we all, people were getting very, very concerned. And then the next day we had like curfews and you can hear fighting in Kiev. So it was happening very, very rapidly. And so I know some of you asked, like, why didn't we leave before? Like Joe Biden was saying, Americans were saying, they closed their embassy, they moved their embassy to Lviv, then they moved out of Ukraine altogether. I believe it's in Poland somewhere. And people are talking about it. They're saying, why didn't you leave? A lot of my American friends are asking me, why didn't I leave? Well, I'm going to tell you why we didn't leave, because nobody believed in Ukraine that this would happen. Nobody believed it. Not me, I didn't believe it. Marina didn't believe it. Nobody believed it. And we all read American news, because American news is, it's always being covered by local media. It's being covered by everybody. So it's not like we don't read American news. We read it. But along with the fear mongering, the war mongering, they felt that this was just a way of Americans to kind of just spread, just overblow things. Let's put it this way. Nobody believed it. And the other thing is that the question is, why didn't we leave immediately? Well, the thing is that when it started, the panic set. So it was very difficult to decide, right? At that point, you could still think, okay, maybe, just maybe, they're going to reach a consensus. Because with the case with Crimea, right, 8 years ago, that thing was taken without a shots being fired. So we don't know if this was just a provocation, if they were going to reach some kind of an agreement. We had no idea what the situation was. And so that was number one. Number two, a lot of people began to leave immediately. That first day, they began to leave. So we don't have a car, so we couldn't just get on the highway and leave. And there were, traffic anyway. So by the time it was known, the panic was starting to set in, right? And we started looking for train tickets, and it was impossible to find something. The only thing that we can find was like a couple of days in advance. And we're like, well, it's going to be too late. Let's see if we can do something else. And by the time we realized later that day that we need to figure something out, the closest day that we can buy tickets for was in a couple of days. We couldn't buy that same day. We couldn't buy the next day. We can only buy. So that was the earliest we could leave. You guys got to remember that when something like this happened, there's a huge panic. And so if you are not one of the select people that knows about it, that has a crystal ball that knows for sure this is going to happen, it's already too late. By the time you know about it, it's already too late. And so by the time we realized, it was already panic set in, but still there was a chance to leave. And a lot of people left. So a lot of people even left before us, people that were undecided. By the time we leave, by the time we wake up on that day that we have to leave, a lot of these people, they left already. So people were making decisions very, very quickly. And at the end of the day, people that decided to stay, they had their reasons to stay. People that decided to leave, to go to a different part of Ukraine, they had their reasons to leave. So you can't really judge anybody, right? Everybody has their own life. Everybody has to make their own decisions. Unless you're that person and you're sitting somewhere in another part of the world, maybe you're sitting in New York, you're sitting there, you're sitting on your couch, you're watching this on TV. You can't judge anybody because you're not in that situation. Everybody needs to make their own decision for themselves. And people need to be respected for that decisions. Unless they're part of the government, unless they have a responsibility to the people, unless they're somewhere there. At least that's how I feel. And so that is the situation here right now. We have no idea, just like anybody else, how long this conflict is going to last, and whether by the time it ends, and it will end at one point or another, it's still going to be the same country that when it was started. This is, are we going to wake up one morning and realize that this is a completely different country, or what the situation is, or what's going to happen? Because All I know is this thing is getting very, very serious, and it's a lot more serious than we previously thought.